everyone, and welcome to this next episode of Diversifying Data. I am your host, as always, Rakhi Sharma, and today I have a very special guest with me. She's new to Kubrick, but not new to discussing this field, but I am so interested to learn more, to understand more, and to understand the challenges, solutions, and hopefully just come away from this a little bit more clued up about how social mobility affects people and affects people in the workplace specifically. But welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm very excited to talk about this. I must admit, I'm not a subject matter expert, but I'm happy to talk about my own personal experiences with social mobility and maybe signpost people in the direction to find out a bit more. So my name is Tracey Young. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Associate here at Kubrick. I'm very new to the role. I've only been in role a couple of months. So this is an exciting opportunity to get to meet you and to be part of the podcast. And just in case there's anyone tuning in who has a vision impairment or is listening in, just to describe myself, I'm white, cisgender female, and I'm wearing a black top with white polka dots, a black cardigan, I've got long brown hair, and I wear glasses.
I love that. I'm going to take the lead from you. So I am an Indian female, and I'm a very short person, I was just going to say. And I have long brown hair, and I'm wearing a shirt dress today, which is light blue. And I feel very professional sitting with you, because I know that diversity, equity and inclusion is something that we are so passionate about here. So what I wanted to understand, there's three different elements of social mobility, right? So there's social mobility in itself, there's social inclusion, and there's social exclusion. So do you mind sort of introducing those three topics, maybe tying them together in reference to each other, and just giving a bit more context around that?
Absolutely. So I'm getting a lot of my reference from the Social Mobility Commission, which is a government agency. We can consider social mobility is the link between a person's profession, background and income, comparing that to the profession, background and income of their parents. Social inclusion is taking steps to make sure that someone's background doesn't influence their future. So when it comes to employment, if someone's from a working class background, social inclusion makes sure that they don't stay in a working class background unless they want to. Not
Which
everyone wants
fine.
to be a CEO, but it's about making sure those barriers aren't in place.
Yeah.
And social exclusion is something that employers can do probably accidentally without even realising, which is putting those barriers in place. For example, only interviewing people that have got a certain level of education for a role without thinking, do we actually need that level of education to do that role? And that can put barriers in place for people who aren't educated to a certain level.
And I think that that's something that I think more than anything is the social exclusion, because you really understand that once you're in working life, you understand that half of what's written on job descriptions are not things that are in the daily practice of your job. And what's most important is the ability to adapt, to pivot to your environment, to understand how to learn and to adapt to new ways of working continuously. And none of that essentially has to do with just pedantically sort of reading, words on a paper or taking a particular exam, although it does help. But that's something that I think Kubrick looked at quite a while ago. And I remember being in the room in that conversation when it was happening about, we want people from all backgrounds to feel comfortable applying. Like that was the goal, because it's something that's out of your control if you haven't gone to university, etc. But it shouldn't be a barrier, right?
It really shouldn't, because going to university, it shows you can study at a certain level. It shows that you develop skills, so group work and writing reports and doing presentations, things like that. But there are people who will be just as hardworking and have the ability to develop those sorts of skills who haven't had the opportunity to go to university. And it's just about looking at potential rather than polish. Say.
Oh, I love that. Looking at potential rather than polish. Yeah, that's the perfect way to put it, actually, because what you're looking to do is really bolster your workforce for the long term. It's not ticking a box. It's saying who is going to stand the test of time, develop with us, grow with us, learn with us as we continue on the journey of building this business. So actually, I love that. An example or three examples of social mobility. I think we were talking about that before. There's a few different schools of thought when it comes to what social mobility is. And if you wouldn't mind just touching on that as well, that would be really helpful.
Definitely. Yep. So there's economists who look at it from one perspective and sociologists who look at it from a different perspective. So economists will look at the income of your income compared to the income your parents had to decide whether you've had upward social mobility or whether your social mobility has stayed the same.
Right.
Whereas sociologists will look at your occupation. So they'll compare the category of your occupation to the occupation of your parents. So I can give some examples, very basic examples of occupational social mobility.
Yeah.
So if you are a doctor and your parents, one of your parents was a doctor, then your job falls into the same social mobility category. So there is no social mobility, you've stayed in the same category.
Sure.
Whereas if you're a doctor but your parents were a plumber, then there has been upward social mobility because the category of your job is higher than the category of your parents' job.
Understood. Actually, that's a really simple way of looking at it as well. So, because you always think about upward social mobility and staying at the same level, but then I think in this generation, it seems to be quite common that there is quite a bit of upward social mobility or stagnant. Would you call it stagnant social mobility from your side of things? If you stay in the same social mobility, in the same category as what your parents have done, is that sort of just remaining in the same category without any change? That's what it's referred to.
Yeah, you could say stagnant. Just it remains unchanged. It's stable.
Yeah.
Social mobility. So there's been no social mobility. You haven't, because mobility is a movement.
Yeah.
So there's been no social mobility.
Got it.
You've stayed in the same category, which is perhaps why people aren't so aware of social mobility. Because if you haven't had social mobility, you wouldn't be aware of it.
Yeah.
And when we get into it, talking about it, I have had social mobility, upward social mobility.
Yeah.
But I didn't really realise it until I started looking into it as well, because you just accept your fate, I guess.
Right, yeah.
You just say, yeah, that's what my parents did, that's what I do, that's just how life is.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Yeah. And I can't wait to dive into your personal story, because I think that's what I always love about doing these podcasts is you discuss a topic, but I think unless what people resonate with always is someone's personal experience with it, someone's real in-depth knowledge from a personal perspective of how it's affected them, how they've overcome barriers, etc. And that's what people connect to. So excited to get into it. But I think from the preliminary research that you've conducted and that you've done, is there like a trend? Is there a pattern that it shows us? Is there any sort of research that has, any papers that have been published that kind of allude to something at all?
So the majority of the research over the past 100 years has all been based on men, because men were the main breadwinners and the data for females just wasn't recorded. So the data's kind of skewed, and at Kubrick we love a bit of data.
Yeah.
So unfortunately,
it's almost like it's all we do.
Funny that. And that shows that the social mobility classification of your parents tends to have a direct impact on your social mobility status. So people from working class, lower socio-economic backgrounds tend to stay in that category. It's quite difficult for people to have upward social mobility because of barriers they face. And that can be things like stereotypes.
So I'm just going to ask the very sort of the questions that have been stipulated by the Social Mobility Commission. And I think that's correct, that all of the questions that I'm asking are ones that they've mandated are the right questions to ask someone when you're trying to gauge their social mobility barriers and discomforts, etc. So I would like to start by asking you what the occupation was of your main household earner when you were around 14 years old.
Okay, so my dad was the main earner in our household. And although he was a cabinet maker by trade, so a trained carpenter, he was a jack of all trades. He did a lot of labouring work. So he would work on council housing. So he would do plastering, tiling, building kitchens, everything really. So he had a very manual, physical job, and he was the main earner. My mum, so before my sister and I were born, she worked in a bank, but as soon as we were born, she gave up that job. And then she took on part-time jobs so that she could do the school run. And she did things from apple picking and potato griddling. When me and my sister were poorly from school, Mum and Dad couldn't afford babysitters, so Mum would just take us to work with her. So I remember sitting all sniffly, feeling poorly, wrapped up in coat and hat, watching Mum picking apples, putting them in her basket.
Unreal.
Or in the shed, like this murky shed, griddling potatoes to make sure that only the right size potatoes were put into the sacks.
Wow.
And she would just pop us on the back of her bike and cycle off to the farm.
That sounds like something in a story. Like it literally sounds like something from like Pollyanna or something. I mean, it doesn't seem real, but that was your reality.
I just assumed everyone's parents,
of course,
went off
you're young.
to the farm to pick apples.
That's so normal. And it was when did you become acutely aware? Sorry to interject, but when did you become aware that was maybe not how other people's families operated?
When you talk to your friends and they go, "Oh, my mum's a secretary or works in marketing or works in computers," and I was like, "Oh, so they don't pick apples, or they're not a cleaner," or because my mum had so many different part-time jobs. A cleaning job, she worked in a bakery, she worked in a school kitchen. So I just assumed that's what everyone's parents did.
It's nothing short of admirable to be able to. People can barely juggle one job at this point, and having that many different hats to wear as well as being a mother is quite something.
That means the main earner in our household when I was 14 was my dad, and he was a labourer, so he would come under working class occupation.
Okay, great. And what type of school did you attend for the most part between 11 and 16?
So I went to the local comprehensive secondary school, which was a state-run or state-funded school. And the reason the Social Mobility Commission asked this question is to find out if people went to independent schools or fee-paying schools, which in my case I didn't.
Yeah, understood. And that's important because that kind of alludes to the educational background of someone as well and where they started out from. So actually this one was really interesting.
It was.
The next one's really, we got to talk about this one. If you finished school after 1980, were you eligible for free school meals at any point during your school years? And you have a funny story around this.
I do. So I answered these questions myself. And then I spoke to my mum yesterday, actually. I'm going on this podcast. I just want to tell you the answers to my questions. And I said, was I eligible for free school meals? And she said, no. And I was like, yes, I was. And she said, no, you weren't. And I have a vivid memory of being told I was going to have a school meal. And I remember this horrible meal. I don't know what it was. I don't remember what it was, but I remember I did not enjoy it. And that I went home and I said to my mum, I don't want school meals anymore. I want packed lunches. And I automatically thought that's because Mum just said, okay, you get free school meals, have your free school meal. But Mum says that I asked for the school meal. Oh. Right. So
that's
and she got a bit defensive. She went, no, it's not like you went to school with holes in your clothes. Implying that if I was eligible for free school meals, it meant we were very poor. But then I did say to her, yes, but my blazer was secondhand and it was also a boy's blazer. So all my friends are wearing their lovely girls' blazers with their buttons down the right side, and I'm wearing the boys' blazer with the buttons down the other side.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, this is the thing though, I understand the pain point as well, because there are all these negative connotations behind something that is really important. If you're eligible for free school meals, it's so important for people who cannot. afford to have packed lunches. It's such an amazing opportunity for inclusion of everyone, but then there are such negative connotations to being poor, of course, and that's probably what your mum reacted the defensive way too. But no, I just thought that was really funny about the school blazers. But you still went to school, you had a full uniform, and that's brilliant.
Exactly.
So actually, in terms of speaking back about your parents, did either of them attend university by the time you were 18? Had they?
Neither of my parents went to university. I went to university, so actually when I went, it was a really big deal because I was the first one in the family to go. And when I spoke to my mum about this question as well, she said, oh, but I went to college for a year.
Yeah.
That's how I got my job in a bank. So before me and my sister were born, my mum worked in a bank. So I think had things been different and my dad had stayed at home, she would have been the higher earner.
Yeah.
So my social mobility background could have been different.
Yeah.
But it's very traditional that the mum stayed at home and the dad went to work. That's the way they did it.
Yeah.
That's the way everyone else did it.
Yeah.
It's not the way everyone does it now.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true.
So, yeah, it was a big deal when I went to university, and they were very proud of the fact that I went. But it was very scary for me. I'd never been away from home before.
Yeah.
During my first week, I didn't take any notes. I didn't phone home. This was, I sound very old. This was before mobile phones. This is before people had mobile phones.
So you had to call on the landline.
It was a call. You had to queue up to use the payphone.
Yeah.
And I decided this is not for me. I felt really out of place. I just didn't enjoy it at all. So I decided I'm not taking any notes. I'm going home. And then I met my friend Keely, who is still a very good friend of mine. She took me under her wing and I copied her notes from the first week. And then I phoned home and was like, oh, I didn't really like it, but I'm okay now. So I gave them the abridged version of the scary situation I was in.
Do you feel like if you maybe because you didn't have a point of reference in terms of having a parent who'd gone through a shared experience as the same shared experience as you, do you feel that was the hindrance, or do you feel like it was just everyone's sort of fish out of water in university? A lot of people haven't left home before that point because you're technically in school at that point. Speak to me a little bit about like how you feel like the social mobility aspect comes into play here, and not having a parent who'd shared in that journey with you kind of was a hindrance to that.
I had no reference point. I knew nothing about it at all. We got sent a big book list. It was like, okay, I'm going to buy all these books.
Yeah.
I'd been to college, but university was so different.
Right.
I was meeting different people. I was in halls, so I was mixing with all different people with different backgrounds. It felt like everyone seemed more confident than me.
Yeah.
I just felt like a bit of a fraud,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I also was entitled, because of the income of my parents, I was entitled to a maintenance grant as well. So I don't know whether that made me feel a little bit less than. Yeah, compared to my fellow students.
That's really actually, in terms of the maintenance grant, I'd never even assumed, because for me, getting to me it would just be sort of an extra boost of help, an extra, we don't have any money at university, everyone's living off of ramen noodles and chicken nuggets and kebabs and God knows what other rubbish, but it's everyone's in the same thing together. Oh, we're skint, we don't have any money, but it's interesting that you saw it as almost like a bit of a handout, and you felt less than. Were other people around you sort of not, you didn't find a lot of people who had that commonality with you, or were a lot of people on that maintenance grant with you?
Not as many people were on the grant as me.
Okay.
So when I was budgeting, like doing my weekly shop, I would try and budget. I made sure I got a job as well to help fund my studies. So I was a cloakroom assistant in
love this. This is brilliant.
In a nightclub, which saw quite a few things working in a nightclub.
I'm sure you must have. Oh God, I was telling you before, I was definitely like a I think I said to you as a defender of your job. I was just there at the end of the night saying, how dare you disrespect her like this? Like, don't throw your coat at her. But I've never met someone who'd actually done that job before. And, you know, everyone knows juggling a job as well as studying is really difficult. But if you felt like that sort of fish out of water anyway, that must have been quite something to feel like you were juggling all of it.
It was, yeah. Everything was just a new learning experience. So I was lucky enough to be in halls in my first year. So my mum and dad did the calculations, worked out with the grant that I could go into halls, but I needed to get a job to help supplement that. And buying books, I was buying secondhand books. You'd go into the local bookshop and you'd buy the secondhand ones. It wasn't even an option to go to the brand new section of the book. I would go to the ones that people had written comments in the margins.
Maybe
sometimes that helped, sometimes it
maybe
didn't.
maybe that's a smart thing to do, actually, and I should have definitely done that. But that, sorry, carry on.
Sorry. So in answer to your question, no, my parents didn't go to university. I was the first one to go.
Yeah.
So having answered those 4 questions from the Social Mobility Commission, we can establish that I had upwards social mobility.
Yeah.
Because I'm from a working class, low socio-economic background, which my mum does not like me saying, but it is true, because she's very proud. And I work at Kubrick. I am a chartered member of the CIPD, which is the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, which means that I am now in a professional category rather than a working class category. So I've had upwards social mobility, which I'd never thought about before.
Yeah. When did you become, when did this become even on in your periphery vision, like, social mobility, I've had upward social mobility here. There's something to be said for breaking down those barriers and really having a conversation about it. When did you even have that come into your sphere? Really
recently. So my background is in HR.
Yeah.
It's been since I moved from HR into diversity, equity and inclusion that I've started just considering all aspects of employment and barriers that people face, as well as gender, race, age, sexual orientation, social mobility. It's not a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. So I think that's why it gets forgotten, why it doesn't get recorded, perhaps. So very recently.
Yeah, and actually this is great, because I feel like the more recent it is, almost the more you're really invigorated to do the research. It's not years of bias of any kind. It's literally like, I want to examine this issue now. I'm so passionate about it. So I'm so glad you've come on the podcast right when you're sort of really shining a light on it and putting focus on it. But I think now we should probably pivot from how well you've done, which is incredible, but really discussing any of the barriers you faced during your progression, because I think that's what people may resonate with. It may be what people think, oh God, I didn't realize that was an aspect of social mobility at all. So maybe if you want to allude to kind of some of the barriers that you face, that would be probably pretty helpful for people.
Okay, so my name's Tracey. I'm from Essex originally. I now live near Brighton, but I grew up in Essex when Essex girl jokes were rife, when there were stereotypes about Tracey and Sharon from Essex who would dance around their handbags, wear white stilettos. They were uneducated, they were airheads. And that's the sort of stereotype that I grew up, I don't know whether I grew up believing, but I grew up having to prove wasn't right about me.
Yeah.
And very recently, my family and I have been watching old home videos. So we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. We used to go to the Isle of Wight on holiday. But one thing my dad invested in was a
video recorder.
A video camera.
Video camera, yeah. God, I keep forgetting what they're called.
We've got videos that my sister recently put from VHS onto DVD. And I was shocked to hear my accent. My accent was so Essex when I was younger, and somehow over the years it's faded, and I don't know whether I've done it intentionally, whether I did it when I was at university to fit in, to feel like I fitted in more, but when I was at college I really don't know, but it's it's really interesting that I've lost that accent as I've gone along the way.
And you felt that was in itself, just the way you talked was a barrier that you had to overcome.
Accent bias is real. It's a real thing. People might not realise they have accent bias.
Yeah.
But if someone's got a really strong accent, it's interesting for the listeners actually just to think, do you listen to what the person says or are you listening to their accent? Because you can have all these judgments, these stereotypes that just pop into your head based on someone's accent.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the Essex accent, the Essex girl stereotype, being called Tracey, from living very close to Southend or Southend.
See, I grew up in Essex too, so I do get all of the reference points as well. But it's yeah, God, I can't. Yeah, it's just, again, this topic is so interesting for me because I never thought about it as its own category. I've just never have. It's always been, like we were discussing it before, race, gender bias, all of these things, it's black and white. It really is black and white. You shouldn't discriminate based on that. But this sort of element is so, social mobility is so nuanced in so many different ways, with the accent bias and a number of things that we're going to be speaking about. Actually quite difficult to take a vested interest in altering the ways of being, because it's so subconscious most of the time. Which, especially with the accent thing. So with that stereotype, how early on did you notice that for yourself with the Essex background that you had?
I think I've always known about the stereotype.
Yeah.
I think the first time it really hit me as, okay, this is going to affect my employment potentially, was when I was relocating from Essex to Brighton, and I applied for a job, an HR job, and a mutual friend told me that someone else he knew who was applying told him, I'm not going to be intimidated by someone called Tracey from Essex.
Oh, you're kidding.
So she had made an assumption about me based on my name and based on the fact I was from Essex. She didn't know anything about me. Perhaps she just assumed I was an airhead. Perhaps she assumed I didn't have a university education.
Wow.
But she just decided I am not a worthy competitor to go up against her for that job. An HR job, that's the thing that gets me.
Yeah, that's wow. I mean, it's something that I can almost see it, because it must happen so many times that people read a CV, because all you do is read a CV, you read a piece of paper, and you judge someone based on that, their name, their background, whatever it is, and they've obviously just taken two facets of your life, your name and you know, the fact that you're from a certain place, and have completely categorized you in a lower class, low education background based off of that.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Luckily for me, the interview panel didn't jump to that conclusion. They actually looked at my CV properly.
Right.
They took into account my qualifications, my experience, my interview, and I got the job, which felt quite nice, knowing that I'd already... Because if someone says that about you, it knocks your confidence. You go in thinking, am I going to get this job? Am I good enough to get this job? Is there something wrong with me?
Yeah.
But the scary thing is that person still might be working in HR. So I hope she's learned about social mobility. I hope she's changed her perspective.
Outlook,
yeah. Because, as I said, that's not covered by the Equality Act. It would not be... illegal to make those assumptions about someone. It's not best practice, but it wouldn't be against the law.
Yeah. And that is literally denying someone an opportunity that could really make their career or make their life situation 10, 15 times better than it is currently, based on two benign facts that have nothing to do with their performance. So that's actually a pretty scary thought. And I think one that's definitely food for thought in terms of, in our everyday lives, when we're liaising with whoever it might be in our jobs or potentially hiring for people in the team, just the judgment with bias that isn't looked at, it's not illegal. Like you said, it's not anything that you'll get penalized for. But when you look at the actual fact of what you're doing and denying someone an opportunity based on that, it's really terrible. So apart from the accent bias, is there any other ones that kind of spring to mind that you faced along that way?
I think just confidence, imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Because people I knew at university, their parents might have been doctors or judges or lawyers, or their parents might have known people of that profession, whereas my mum and dad knew other working class people.
Yeah.
As I said, we went on holiday to the Isle of Wight, 2 weeks every summer in the same chalet on the same holiday holiday
Caravan?
No, camp. Holiday camp.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Whereas some of my friends went to America, they went to Spain, they went to Italy. I had such a lovely collection of postcards from my friends who sent me postcards from all these exotic places they'd been on holiday, and I used to send them pretty much the same the same postcard every year, which was the shape of the Isle of Wight, saying, I stayed here.
Oh, well, do you know what? I was saying this to you before as well. There's such beautiful places here that we don't explore enough anyway, but I understand how even just being, younger as a child and, wanting to have all of that, but feeling that it's out of reach. I think that's the barrier as well, is seeing something that's so out of reach. And that's the imposter syndrome. It's like, we'll never get there. Yeah. We're here. We're in this bucket. We're in this bracket. Oh, wow. America, that's so exotic. I could only dream of going somewhere like that. And then if you do manage to break through those barriers, it is achievable. So it's really like, how do we jump over that barrier to achieve what actually is possible once you do that? So I think that you've done an amazing job of overcoming them. Even being confident enough to speak to your experience is really something, because you have to do that reflection to understand it. But why do you think these conversations are so important on a larger scale?
Because I think there's so lack of knowledge and lack of understanding about social mobility that organisations, employers, HR departments could be excluding people based on stereotype and bias. And that means that they've got less diversity of thought in their organisations. If they're only employing people who have been are educated to a certain level, have been to a certain university, you're going to get people who are taught by the same tutors, who studied the same coursework. So you're going to have less diversity of thought. Yeah. I watched a training event, and someone said that there's a lake of graduates, but there's an ocean of non-graduates. So if you want diverse talent, there is so much talent out there. Hardworking, strong work ethic, people who would love an opportunity but are often dismissed because they don't fit the criteria. And that comes back to that. Are they polished, or do they have potential? Yeah.
Spinning this back around from a work perspective, you've recently joined Kubrick. I'm sure you have your own initiatives that you want to help push forward around this. From kind of your standpoint, and this could be very personal to your experience of what you felt would have helped you, or maybe on a more general, wider scale, what can organisations do to support? And you were going to talk, I think, about Kubrick and some of the initiatives that we've got here as well.
So we recently had a intern program where we worked in partnership with 10,000 Black interns, and we took 10 interns on a 6-week placement to work with different people across Kubrick, some of them in the HR department, which is lovely. Just to give people from underrepresented backgrounds an opportunity to experience life in the workplace, because that might encourage them to go to want to work in IT or AI or data management in the future. So just an insight into the workplace. So companies can do things like that. You can do mentoring programs, but you can do like reverse mentoring. So you can have a senior member of staff and a more junior member of staff, and they mentor each other. So it's not just from the top down, it's about from the bottom up as well, feedback, two-way feedback. But you have to go into it with a really open mind, and you have to be willing to listen to that feedback. Absolutely. It can't be a tick box exercise.
No, exactly. And we actually had, it was a few months ago, we had a lovely gentleman on the podcast, and he was actually from one of our large financial clients, and he was a big believer. He was very senior in his role, but he was a very big believer in reverse mentoring, and he was talking about learning so much from, because, you know, when you're higher up, you're further removed from what's actually happening on the ground. So if you want to learn what's actually happening in your team, you talk to someone who is doing that type of work that you are so far removed from that you don't have any idea of what's actually happening. You just have sort of everything that's been filtered until it reaches up to you. So I love things like that. And I think it's a really good first step. And I think it sets the precedent for doing more in that field. And I think people, this is again, very personal opinion to me, I think with sensitive things of this nature, whether it's social mobility, gender, you know, diversity, etc., people are so afraid now to get it wrong that they would rather not take any steps sometimes, because they're so afraid of what, if they get it wrong, what are the, you know, how will it impact negatively? I just think take the step, and if it doesn't work in the exact manner that you need it to, you regroup, you recenter, take the learnings from it, and then move on and replicate it to something that's more fit for purpose or in line with what's actually beneficial for people. So do you think that organizations kind of, what's the best way to phrase this? Organizations can kind of get behind things in a smaller way to lead up to a bigger way? Or do you think that it should be done loud and proud and everyone talking about it? How do you think that it should be done?
I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it. And I think when you say about people being concerned if they make a mistake, I think if it's got positive intent behind it, people will know. People will know if you're genuine, if you've got senior management buy-in, if your senior management team are talking about it and saying, look, we want to do this, we're not really sure how to do it, we're going to give it a go. Do a pilot scheme. There's nothing wrong with that. Pick a small area of the business, one team, one department, and just think about an initiative that you could bring in. Don't get too committed to it, because you need to be open to review and reflect and learn from it. It might not work, and that's okay. We learn from things like that. And then if you find out, nope, that didn't work, let's think about what we can do differently next time. Do pilot number 2 before you roll it out to the wider organisation. And I think little things like that just show employees that that's something that's important to the organisation. During COVID, people had opportunity to reevaluate their lives, to reevaluate what is important to them. And what's important to them is work-life balance. It's a company that's got strong values, that cares about the environment, that cares about its employees. So a social mobility initiative is a way of signalling to clients, customers, employees, potential employees, this is something we care about. But it can't be a tick box exercise. It has to be real. It has to be genuine. And that's how you attract and retain diverse talent. And another thing is track that data. As I said, most of the data is for men historically over the past 100 years. Make an active decision to track data. Ask your employees about their social mobility. People might not want to answer. That's okay. The people that do, take that on board. And don't just think about new people, think about promotion decisions. Is it only the people from the professional backgrounds or the higher socioeconomic backgrounds that are putting themselves forward for promotions? What about your people from working class backgrounds and lower socioeconomic backgrounds? Have they not got the confidence to put themselves forward? Why is that? What can you do to support them? That's
true, actually, because you think sometimes the buck stops after, you know, oh, they've
once you're in the door,
you're in the door, it's fine. Like you've had upward social mobility, so it's absolutely fine. But the you know, like you even alluded to before, the consequences and that knock-on effect of, you know, feeling less than, feeling like, oh, I'm almost so grateful just to have this thing that I won't even push to have that conversation, or I don't know how to have that conversation. You know, you don't have any examples or points of reference where you've seen people in your world having those conversations and you don't know the best path forward. Are there any mentoring schemes or things that can actually help people have those difficult conversations when they've not been a part of that ever? I think those are all fabulous ideas, and I'm hoping that we can see some real change being long lasting. I think that's the thing that with this podcast, I've noticed that everyone comes in with good intentions, which I think is incredible, but it's about building that framework for long lasting change rather than it as you keep saying, tick box exercise. We've ticked the diversity and inclusion bucket. We're good.
What should we talk about now?
What should we talk about next? Yeah, exactly. It's and I just want that to be noted. So it really, because you've just joined Kubrick, I know many people won't be sort of familiar with your face or may not have seen you around the office. If they wanted to reach out to you to kind of understand more about your role from a Kubrick perspective, first of all, and even understand more about the social mobility elements, or if they've connected to a story, do you want to maybe tell people, how they can get hold of you and things of that nature?
Yeah, absolutely. Please message me on Teams. My email address is in the address book. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I post different things on Workplace as well. So just reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk. I'm always happy to share my experiences, because I think if I can share my experiences, it might encourage someone else to share theirs as well. And yes, my mum didn't like me going through those questions with her, but there is no shame in admitting where you've come from and admitting where you are now and seeing that progress. That's great, Mum.
Yeah,
that's not something to be
down
about. That's great.
Exactly. And I apologize to your mum for me for asking those questions on the podcast, but no, I think that there's such a pride that must come with not allowing those barriers to keep you back from achieving your full potential. And I think the encouragement message of saying, whatever background you're from, if you have something that you want to achieve, it isn't too late. Maybe you don't have any points of reference. Maybe you don't have anything that you can directly refer to as like, here's the path to best success. But there are avenues out there, and there's so many people who can encourage you on that journey and who've had that upward social mobility. And I'm really grateful for you coming on the podcast. So thank you so much. And it's been such a pleasure having you.
It's been an absolute pleasure as well to get to know you, to get to know people at Kubrick, to be part of the podcast, and just have really important conversations, and hopefully encourage people just to think differently and have conversations themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're leaving it there for today. I will be back next month for another podcast episode, but this one has been so enlightening. I completely forgot we were talking about and we're doing a podcast. I was just like talking to you as normal, but we're really excited to have you in the office. And if anyone wants to reach out to Tracey, as she said, she's more than willing to lend an ear whenever. So we will see you on the next podcast. Thank you all for listening.